This mate named Eric Pondy is the most incorrigible troublemaker in school. Teachers deem him a true spawn of hell with no future ahead. But they simply don't know what lies beneath Eric's combative demeanor. Stockholm, the 1950s. At first glance, Eric seems to live in the most ordinary family. Everyone sits decorously at the dinner table. But if Eric even slightly mishandles his knife, let alone drops it, his dad promptly slaps him, followed by a belting after the meal. His mom, afraid to utter a word to her husband, muffles the sounds of her son's beatings by playing the piano. It's no wonder that from such a life, Eric has become embittered and aggressive. He constantly picks fights at school, and after yet another brawl, he gets expelled. Returning home, Eric finds his mom in conversation with a lawyer. He hastily bids farewell to Mrs. Ponty and hands the lad a business card just in case. Alone with her son, Mom speaks incredibly gently to him, but informs him that he'll have to go to boarding school right away. Upon arrival, Eric is promptly greeted by senior student Otto Silverhelm, who enjoys horseback riding and generally looks like the school's top student. With pronounced politeness, Otto shows the newcomer around the grounds and then escorts him to his room. As they part ways, the lad mentions that Eric can always turn to him for help, as teamwork is highly valued at this school. Soon, Eric gets acquainted with his neighbor Pierre. He loves listening to jazz, reading books, and studying. Eric and Pierre quickly hit it off, and the neighbor even offers to help the newbie with math lessons. In the evening, Eric finds himself in the dining hall for the first time and notices a strict hierarchy among the students' seating arrangements. Classmates him that in their school, juniors are not allowed to sit next to seniors, and those less affluent cannot sit with the more wealthy. Another of Eric's neighbors suddenly asks him about his father's political views and receives a sharp reply. "None of your damn business." Student Council President Otto, who was recently polite and courteous, asks Eric to stand up from the table for swearing. His accomplice, Dahlen, takes a knife and hits the newcomer on the head as punishment. Local teachers can't be considered paragons of pedagogy either. For example, the history teacher illustrates the superiority of some peoples over others using his own students. He calls Eric to the board, labeling him as a typical representative of the valiant Germanic people, and humiliates his friend Pierre for his distinctly southern appearance. During lunch, Eric discusses the history class incident with Johann and once again becomes emotionally expressive. Otto overhears. He demands that the newcomer come forward and accept punishment. Eric refuses, so the senior sends him to stand in the corner for underachievers. But the lad disagrees even with this, earning himself another punishment. Life at the boarding school progresses in its own way. Eric tries to channel his energy into constructive activities, studying, socializing with Pierre, and sports. He even manages to secure a spot on the swimming team, breaking the local record. Pierre isn't particularly pleased with Eric's athletic success. He immediately tells his friend that it won't end well for him, as the more he stands out, the higher the chances of incurring the wrath of the student council members. As if to confirm his words, Otto's messenger enters the room and demands that Eric immediately report to the senior dormitory. Eric complies, but upon arrival, Dahlen orders the newcomer to shine everyone's shoes for the entire company. The lad refuses and leaves. The next day, Pierre can't believe that his friend dared to defy the seniors. He warns that if Eric dares to fight any of them, he'll be immediately expelled. Besides, conflicts are always better resolved peacefully. The following day, Dahlen purposely shoulders into Eric and demands an apology. The newcomer refuses to apologize, and in the evening, he's ordered to appear in the ring. Pierre explains to his friend that seniors beat up juniors who misbehave there. The goal is to endure as many blows as you can and then beg for mercy. Giving up is an option, but it's better not to even try. And if you don't show up, everyone will consider you a coward. Eric decides not to go anywhere, and late in the evening, Otto's henchmen burst into their room. Under the pretext of inspecting the room, they create real chaos inside. The next day, Eric practices in the pool, and his coach tells him that there will be a championship at school for Christmas, established by the father of one of the students, Liverhausen, and victory for this lad seems predetermined. This demotivates Eric, but the coach says that with his athletic talent, he still needs to give it a try. During lunch, Otto announces that there will be a student council meeting in the evening, and all misbehaving students, including Eric, who is no longer called by his name but only the Rat, must attend. The meeting resembles a real trial. Eric confronts the chairman, Otto, and refuses to apologize, for which he receives 2 weekends of compulsory labor and 8 weekends of house arrest. The first weekend arrives, and Eric spends it doing forced labor. Dahlen has prepared a task for him, to dig a small trench alone. The lad completes the task, even though it starts pouring rain, and when he hands it over to the seniors, they give him a new task, to fill the trench back up. When Eric heads to the dining hall for dinner, there's no one there. Local Finnish staff member named Marja serves him food separately. She shows kindness to the lad and says that he's being treated unfairly. Monday. Once again, they all clash during the weekend, and Eric is left alone. In the dining hall, he encounters Marja again, who flirts with him and says she'll be walking around the secret smoking spot at 7 o'clock. Eric arrives there on time, but until the last moment, he doesn't understand why the girl lured him here. She kisses the stunned Eric and hugs him. The initiation night arrives, the time when newcomers receive special attention from the members of the student council. Eric prepares a resistance plan in advance and barricades the door. Eric and Pierre keep watch for the troublemakers, but the fortifications of books and tables don't save them. Otto swings open the door of their room and empties a bucket of sewage onto the floor and beds, barely managing to control his nausea. Eric and Pierre clean up the room, filling the bucket again. Refilling the bucket, Eric sneaks into the senior dormitory, and while everyone sleeps, he pours it right onto Otto's face. During lunch, Eric publicly jokes that someone at the table smells awful. The lad stands up, approaches Otto, takes a sniff, and the senior erupts in fury, viciously beating the newcomer. Eric can't fight back, his hands tied behind his back. He's on the verge of losing consciousness, but Marja intervenes, and upon her cry, the principal arrives. Otto stops. The day of the swimming competition arrives. Eric wins in all disciplines, with only the 300-meter race remaining. The coach enters the locker room and tells Eric that he has every chance to surpass Liverhausen. The coach promises that if he wins, no one will touch him and vows to ensure it. Eric wins the distance, setting 3 records at the championship. He's the absolute triumph of the tournament. On Christmas Eve, Eric finally returns home. His mother praises him for his excellent grades and swimming trophy, but his father doesn't even pay attention to them. He's most concerned about the 3 for conduct. Eric tries to explain that he simply didn't want to be a pushover for the seniors, but his father refuses to listen. Returning to school, the lad faces unpleasant changes. Marja inexplicably avoids him, while Otto and his gang start picking on Pierre. Eric realizes that the seniors have decided to change tactics and hassle his neighbor, and he even decides to quit swimming. Meanwhile, Marja directly tells him not to visit her anymore, but Otto and his gang persist. One evening, they catch Eric outside the dormitory and bring him to a room where his friend stands undressed. Dallin mocks him, threatening to stub out a cigarette on the lad's chest. Eric volunteers to take the punishment for his friend, and Dallin extinguishes the cigarette on him. The lad doesn't utter a sound, despite the excruciating pain. Pierre is ordered to dress, and is assigned a meeting in the ring the next day. The following day, Eric tries to dissuade Pierre from going to the ring, but his friend is determined to fight and stand his ground. The friends argue, but Eric still comes to watch the match. It starts promisingly. Pierre punches Otto straight in the face. However, such audacity enrages the opponent, who beats Pierre almost unconscious. Despite this, Pierre refuses to beg for mercy. Eric watches with tears in his eyes and leaves. Later, in their room, he promises Pierre to deal with Otto and stop his bullying, but for now, Otto switches his focus back to Eric. Initially, as part of his forced labor, Eric is punished to drive 4 posts into the ground for setting up a table. But closer to nightfall, Eric learns that these posts were intended for him. The hooligans tie the lad up with ropes, then douse him with buckets of hot and cold water. He's left alone on the street, risking freezing to death. After some time, Marja finds him and takes her beloved to her room, nursing him back to health. Returning to his room, Eric finds a letter from Pierre. In it, his friend writes that he has decided to leave school and asks not to hold it against him. Pierre calls Eric his only friend, and the lad cries from loneliness and frustration. After the biology teacher, who adored Pierre, accuses his best friend of inaction and cowardice, Eric's patience runs out. He decides to ignore the risk of expulsion and retaliates by confronting Dallin and another big guy from Otto's clique. The seniors rejoice, thinking that the so-called rats will finally learn a lesson, but Eric doesn't look frightened at all. On the contrary, he's very confident and promises to tear his opponents apart. Otto sees how skilled Eric is in hand-to-hand combat and clearly becomes scared. Instead of humiliating the leader of the hooligans in front of everyone, Eric simply walks away from the ring in silence. He heads towards the staff dormitory and asks them to call Marja. A woman from the kitchen informs him that the girl was fired 3 days ago for inappropriate behavior. The students receive their mail, and one of Otto's cronies notices that Eric has received a letter from Finland. The senior immediately goes to the lad's room and confiscates the envelope. In front of everyone, the hooligan reads Marja's message. The girl writes to reassure Eric about the possibility of pregnancy because she took all precautions, and she confesses her love to him. On the same day, Eric is summoned to the principal's office. The principal informs the lad that he has no choice but to expel Eric immediately without passing exams. The lad doesn't argue with the school head's decision, only asking to return his letter from Marja. The principal refuses and advises Eric to simply forget about the existence of this girl. With less than a day left before going home, Eric decides to teach Otto a final lesson. He tracks down the seniors in the woods far from the school. When Otto walks with his horse, Eric forces him to kneel. The hooligan has nowhere to run, and he begins to describe vividly how he will kill his enemy, take his ring, and knock out his teeth, and no one will recognize him. Otto starts to panic. Eric walks away, leaving Otto crying on the ground. Gathering his belongings, he remembers he has the lawyer's business card with him. The lawyer promptly arrives at the school. Eric attends the local teachers' meeting and confronts the principal, accusing him of violating Sweden's law, which clearly establishes a citizen's right to personal correspondence. Despite this, the principal refuses to return the letter. Just then, the lawyer steps forward from behind Eric. He explains that he just spoke with an acquaintance reporter who is eager to hear Eric's story and now wants to visit the school for an excursion. The teachers start to fuss and ask questions. The principal realizes he's in deep trouble and agrees to cooperate. Several months pass. Eric graduates from school. He returns home with excellent grades, guaranteeing him admission to any college in the country. But his father is once again dissatisfied. He's not happy with Eric's behavioral grades and the affair Eric is having at the internat. He orders Eric to his room again, but this time things don't go as usual. Eric threatens that in half an hour, his father will end up in the hospital because all his limbs will be broken. At the hospital, he'll have to say he fell down the stairs. And if he tries to involve the police, Eric will immediately tell them everything Mr. Pawnee did to his family all these years. The father is shocked, looking at him, and for the first time, fear seems to flash in his eyes. Some time passes. Eric visits Pierre and learns that he's going to study in Geneva. As for Eric, he gets a job at a law firm. For now, he's just a courier there, but from now on, his main dream is to become a lawyer and defend the world from injustice. The friends shake hands and agree to meet again someday.